The equipment bay hummed with the steady rhythm of maintenance work as Private Sarah Chun methodically cleaned and cataloged weapon components. Her movements were precise, each rifle part inspected with the thoroughness of someone who understood that lives depended on perfect functionality. The other soldiers barely glanced her way as they passed through, their conversations filled with stories of combat, training, and upcoming deployments. "You wouldn't cut it out there, Chun," called out Corporal Williams from across the bay. "Stick to your wrenches and spare parts." Sarah continued her work without looking up, her jaw tightening slightly as she heard the familiar laughter that followed. She had grown accustomed to the dismissive comments, the way her fellow soldiers treated her like furniture in the equipment room. The afternoon sun streamed through the high windows, casting long shadows across the rows of weapons and gear. Sarah's hands moved with practiced efficiency as she disassembled an M4 carbine, her fingers knowing every spring and pin by feel. Before we dive into this story, drop a comment and let us know what state you're watching from. Maybe you've seen similar situations where someone was underestimated in your community. Heavy footsteps echoed through the bay, and the casual chatter died instantly. Sergeant Martinez appeared in the doorway, his weathered face scanning the room with the intensity of someone who had seen real combat. The morning sun cast long shadows across the firing range as Sarah Martinez adjusted her grip on the standard-issue rifle for the third time. The weapon felt foreign in her hands despite weeks of training. Around her, the other recruits settled into their positions with growing confidence, their previous sessions having yielded respectable groupings on the paper targets 50 meters downrange. Staff Sergeant Williams paced behind the firing line, his weathered face showing increasing concern as he observed Sarah's stance. "Your breathing is all wrong, Martinez," he called out. "Relax your shoulders and remember what we practiced." Sarah nodded and tried to implement his guidance, but when the command to fire echoed across the range, her shots scattered wildly across the target. 3 rounds missed the paper entirely, embedding themselves in the dirt backstop with dull thuds that seemed to announce her failure to everyone within earshot. Before we continue with Sarah's journey, drop a comment and let us know what state you're watching from. Maybe military families are common in your area, and you've seen this kind of determination before. The snickers from nearby, firing positions cut through the morning air like knife blades. Private Johnson shook his head in apparent disbelief, while Private Chun whispered something to his neighbor that made them both grin. Sarah felt heat rising in her cheeks as she lowered the rifle, knowing that once again she had proven herself the weakest link in their unit. The afternoon brought no relief from Sarah's morning humiliation. During weapons maintenance, she sat alone at the far end of the cleaning table while the other recruits clustered together, sharing stories of their shooting successes and upcoming weekend passes. Their laughter felt like a wall between her and any hope of belonging. Staff Sergeant Williams approached her station, his boots clicking against the concrete floor with measured precision. "Martinez, you need to see me after evening chow," he said quietly. "We need to discuss your progress." Sarah's stomach dropped as she nodded in acknowledgement. She knew what those conversations typically meant. 3 weeks into basic training, and she had yet to qualify with a rifle. Other recruits who struggled with different aspects of training were finding their footing, but marksmanship remained her insurmountable obstacle. Private Johnson leaned over from his cleaning station with a smirk. "Maybe you should try throwing the bullets instead, Martinez. Might have better accuracy that way." The comment drew chuckles from nearby recruits, and Sarah focused intently on her rifle components to avoid meeting anyone's gaze. She had grown up in a military family, with a father who served 2 tours overseas and a brother currently deployed with the Marines. The weight of her legacy pressed down on her shoulders like a heavy pack on a long march. That evening, as she walked toward the instructor's office, Sarah wondered if she would be the first Martinez to wash out of military service. The thought made her jaw clench with determination she did not know she possessed. Staff Sergeant Williams sat behind his desk, Sarah's training file spread open before him like evidence in a court-martial. The fluorescent light cast harsh shadows across his face as he studied her scores from the past 3 weeks. Every category showed adequate progress except for the one that mattered most. "Martinez, Your physical fitness scores are above average, he began, his finger tracing down the page. Your academic performance is stellar. Your leadership potential during field exercises shows real promise. But this, he tapped the marksmanship section. This is a problem we cannot ignore. Sarah sat rigidly in her chair, hands clasped tightly in her lap. She had rehearsed explanations during the walkover, but now they seemed inadequate. The silence stretched between them like a chasm. I know what you are thinking, Williams continued. Your father earned a Bronze Star in Afghanistan. Your brother just made sergeant with Force Recon. Military service runs in your blood. But wanting something and being capable of it are not always the same thing. His words hit harder than any insult from her fellow recruits. Sarah felt something shift inside her chest, a spark of defiance that surprised her with its intensity. She met his gaze directly for the first time since entering his office. With respect, Staff Sergeant, I am not ready to give up, she said. Her voice carried a steadiness that had been absent on the firing range. There has to be something we have not tried yet. Williams leaned back in his chair, studying her face with renewed interest. The next morning brought news that sent ripples of anxiety through the recruit barracks. Advanced combat training would begin in 5 days, and qualifying with their rifles was now mandatory for progression. Those who failed would face administrative separation from the program. Sarah watched her fellow recruits receive the announcement with varying degrees of confidence. Private Johnson actually smiled, while Private Chin nodded with quiet assurance. For them, the news represented an exciting step forward. For Sarah, it felt like a countdown to the end of her military career. During the lunch break, she found herself alone on the bleachers overlooking the obstacle course. The other recruits had formed their usual social clusters, but Sarah needed solitude to process the weight of her situation. 5 days to master what had eluded her for 3 weeks. You look like someone just told you Christmas was canceled, a voice said behind her. Sarah turned to find Master Sergeant Rodriguez approaching, his weathered face showing genuine concern rather than the frustration she had grown accustomed to seeing from instructors. Rodriguez had a reputation among the recruits as someone who had seen everything during his 20-year career. Just thinking about next week, Staff Sergeant, she replied, using his proper title despite his informal approach. Rodriguez settled beside her on the bleachers, his presence somehow both comforting and intimidating. You know, Martinez, in 2 decades of training recruits, I have learned that sometimes the biggest obstacles are not what they appear to be. Sometimes what looks like failure is just preparation for something extraordinary. The 4th day arrived with unseasonable rain that turned the firing range into a muddy quagmire. Sarah stood in formation with her platoon, watching other recruits complete their final practice sessions before tomorrow's qualifying test. Each successful grouping from her peers felt like another nail in the coffin of her military aspirations. Staff Sergeant Williams called her name, and she stepped forward with heavy boots that seemed to sink deeper into the mud with each step. The weight of the rifle felt different today, heavier somehow, as if it carried the burden of her impending failure. Martinez, this is your last practice session, Williams announced loud enough for nearby recruits to hear. Make it count. Sarah took her position at the firing line, acutely aware of the eyes watching her. Private Johnson made no effort to hide his anticipation of another spectacular failure, while Private Chin showed what might have been sympathy on his usually stoic face. The targets seemed impossibly distant through the rain, their white centers barely visible through the gray morning haze. Sarah adjusted her stance, remembering every piece of advice she had received over the past weeks. Breathing, sight alignment, trigger control. The fundamentals that seemed to abandon her every time it mattered. As she raised the rifle to her shoulder, a strange calm settled over her despite the chaos in her mind. For a brief moment, the mockery and pressure faded away, leaving only her, the rifle, and the target. But as quickly as it came, the feeling disappeared, replaced by the familiar tension that had plagued her training. The morning of qualification testing arrived with crisp autumn air that cut through the pre-dawn darkness. Sarah had barely slept, her mind cycling through every technique she had learned and failed to execute properly. Around her, other recruits displayed varying degrees of nervousness, but none carried the weight of almost certain failure that pressed down on her shoulders. Master Sergeant Rodriguez appeared at the firing line just as the sun crested the horizon, casting long shadows across the range. His presence was unexpected, as senior NCOs typically observed rather than participated in basic qualification exercises. "Williams, I need to borrow Martinez for a moment," Rodriguez said with quiet authority that brooked no argument. Sarah followed him away from the main firing line to a smaller range, typically used for instructor training. Her confusion deepened when Rodriguez produced a different rifle from the equipment shed, one she did not recognize from their standard inventory. "Martinez, sometimes the problem is not the shooter," Rodriguez said as he handed her the unfamiliar weapon. "Sometimes it is the tool. This rifle has a different weight distribution, different sighting system. I want you to try something for me." The new rifle felt strange in her hands, yet somehow more natural than the standard issue weapon she had struggled with for weeks. Rodriguez positioned himself beside her, his experienced eye noting details that other instructors had missed. "Forget everything you think you know about shooting," he instructed. "Stop trying so hard to be perfect and just let your instincts guide you. Sometimes the best shooters are the ones who feel the shot rather than think it." Sarah raised the unfamiliar rifle to her shoulder, feeling the different balance point, as Rodriguez had instructed. The weapon seemed to settle naturally into position, as if it had been waiting for her all along. She forced herself to stop analyzing every micro-movement and simply breathe. The target downrange came into focus with startling clarity. Where before she had struggled to align her sights properly, now everything seemed to fall into place without conscious effort. The crosshairs found the center of the target, as if drawn there by magnetism. "Trust your instincts," Rodriguez murmured beside her. "Stop fighting the rifle and let it become an extension of yourself." Sarah squeezed the trigger with a smooth, steady pressure that felt entirely natural. The rifle spoke with authority, its report echoing across the empty range. Through the scope, she watched a perfect hole appear in the exact center of the target, so precise it looked like it had been punched there by a machine. Rodriguez whistled low under his breath. "Again," he said simply. 5 more shots followed in rapid succession, each one finding its mark with surgical precision. Sarah felt as though she was watching someone else shoot, someone who had been hiding inside her all along. The rifle had become an extension of her will, responding to intentions she barely formed consciously. When the final shot echoed across the range, Rodriguez stood in stunned silence for several seconds. The target displayed a grouping so tight that all 6 holes could be covered by a quarter. He turned to study Sarah, with new understanding dawning in his experienced eyes. Rodriguez examined the target with the intensity of a detective studying evidence. The grouping was not just good, it was exceptional by any standard. He had seen thousands of recruits over his career, and this level of precision was typically reserved for seasoned snipers with years of experience. "Martinez, where did you learn to shoot like this?" he asked, his voice carrying a mixture of amazement and suspicion. Sarah lowered the rifle, her own surprise evident in her expression. "I have never shot like this before, sir. I mean, my father took me hunting a few times when I was younger, but nothing like this. I honestly do not understand what just happened." Rodriguez studied her face for signs of deception, but found only genuine bewilderment. He had encountered natural shooters before, individuals who possessed an innate ability that transcended training, but Sarah's case was unprecedented. The contrast between her performance with standard equipment and this specialized rifle suggested something beyond simple talent. "We need to test this further," he decided. "But first, we have a qualification to complete." He gestured toward the main firing line where other recruits were beginning their official testing. "Your platoon will be wondering where you disappeared to." As they walked back toward the main range, Rodriguez made a mental note to contact some old friends in special operations. If Sarah's abilities were genuine, there were people who needed to know about her. People who could provide opportunities that basic training could never offer. The standard issue rifle felt foreign in Sarah's hands again as she rejoined her platoon, but something fundamental had changed within her. The official qualification began with Sarah positioned at lane 7, flanked by Private Johnson on her left and Private Chen on her right. Staff Sergeant Williams called the firing line to attention, his voice carrying across the range with practiced authority. 40 recruits prepared to demonstrate their marksmanship skills, but all eyes seemed focused on Sarah's lane. "Load and make ready," Williams commanded. Sarah inserted her magazine with hands that trembled slightly, not from fear, but from the strange energy that had awakened within her during the session with Rodriguez. The standard rifle felt different now, not foreign, but simply less responsive than the specialized weapon she had used earlier. "Commence firing when ready," Williams announced. The range erupted with the staccato rhythm of rifle fire as recruits engaged their targets. Sarah tried to recapture the feeling from her earlier session, that moment of perfect clarity when the rifle had become an extension of her will. She steadied her breathing and allowed her instincts to guide her aim. Her first shot found the target's center, not with the surgical precision she had demonstrated earlier, but with solid accuracy that surprised everyone watching. The second and third rounds followed with increasing confidence, each shot building upon the last. Private Johnson glanced over from his lane, his smug expression fading as he watched Sarah's steady performance. Other recruits began to notice as well, their own shooting rhythm disrupted by the unexpected competence from someone they had written off as hopeless. Williams lowered his binoculars, his weathered face showing the first hints of genuine interest he had displayed towards Sarah's marksmanship in weeks. The silence that followed Sarah's demonstration stretched across the firing range like a hell breath. 40 recruits stood transfixed by what they had witnessed, their previous mockery transformed into something approaching awe. Private Johnson's mouth hung open in disbelief, while Private Chun shook his head slowly, as if trying to process the impossible. Colonel Martinez approached his daughter with visible pride radiating from his weathered features. The military bearing he had maintained throughout the demonstration softened as he placed a hand on her shoulder. "Your grandfather will be proud, Sarah," he said quietly. "Rodriguez will be coordinating with some specialized units who have expressed interest in your unique abilities. Your basic training will continue, but your future in the military has just taken a very different direction." Staff Sergeant Williams stepped forward, his entire demeanor towards Sarah transformed. "Martinez, I owe you an apology. Sometimes the most exceptional soldiers do not fit into standard molds. Your grandfather's legacy lives on through you." The other recruits began to approach Sarah with newfound respect, their earlier dismissive attitudes replaced by genuine admiration. The social dynamics that had isolated her for weeks dissolved in the face of undeniable proof of her extraordinary capabilities. As the sun reached its zenith over the firing range, Sarah Martinez stood surrounded by her peers for the first time since training began. The rifle that had revealed her true nature rested comfortably in her hands, no longer a burden, but a key to a future she had never imagined possible. If this story of hidden strength and family legacy inspired you, drop a comment about your favorite moment or share if you have witnessed similar courage and determination in your own life.